From Captivity to Freedom, subtitled I Didn't Know I Was Deceived, written and read by Grace Josie. Chapter 4. Chapter 4 begins with a quote from Dr. Seuss, and it reads, "Today you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you." Within a year, Jerald and Chloe had their first child. More children quickly followed, and by the time Chloe reached her 29th birthday, they had 7 children. I was the third oldest. There were 4 boys and 3 girls. Chloe loved mothering. She rarely felt tired, even when pregnant. In fact, she said that she felt better when she was pregnant than when she was not. One of my mother's best qualities was her example of thankfulness. She was always expressing thankful thoughts about creation and her blessings. She found the following saying deeply motivating and inspiring. "If you are given lemons, just make them into lemonade." And with regards to work, she pushed us to do our best when we had our chores by saying, "Just pull on your hind leg a little harder if you're tired." And her favorite song was "Count Your Many Blessings." Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. After their wedding, Jerald and Chloe settled down on a farm in Paris, Ontario, with a 2-story rented house from a veterinarian. The long driveway to the house was lined with gentle weeping willows. About halfway down onto the property, the driveway went over a small bridge. I remember playing with my brother and sister in the little creek below, catching frogs and small fish, throwing stones into the water to make it splash, and building dams with larger stones. The creek bank was fascinating for a child, with its wild flowers, large green grasshoppers, praying mantises, and several varieties of salamanders. Huge dandelions grew in the yard near the creek. We would pull up the stems, remove the flowers, and make necklace chains by pushing the smaller end of the stem into the hollow lower end. The house had indoor plumbing, something my mother really appreciated. Laundry was done by hand with a wringer washing machine and hung out to dry on a clothesline in the yard during warmer weather. Diapers were boiled in a special soap solution on the stove. In the winter, clothes were hung to dry on lines drawn across the hallway on the second floor of the house, thus supplying natural humidity to make the heated indoor air more comfortable. My favorite and earliest childhood memory is of my dad taking me for a ride on his green John Deere farm tractor. He loved taking his kids for rides while he did work in the fields. We would sit on his knee, held in his long, strong arms as he turned the big black steering wheel. Sometimes he would let me down in the corner of the field to pick wild daisies while he finished working. I'd bring a fistful of these precious white and yellow blossoms back to the farmhouse for my mom to place in a vase on the kitchen table. Daisies became my favorite flower. One day, Dad was mowing the yard while I was playing in our screened-in back porch. Suddenly, he appeared at the door, yanked it open, and hobbled in. His foot had caught in the mower blade. I watched frozen in horror as blood oozed out onto the porch floor. He yelled to my mother for help. His big left toe had sustained a huge, deep gash and a broken bone. Mom called a neighbor who took him, along with his nearly severed appendage, to the hospital. He returned later with the toe stitched up and the foot fully bandaged. Had he not been wearing steel-toed shoes when the incident occurred, things would have been much more serious. My grandpa, Lawa, now Louis, was widowed about 5 years after immigrating to Canada. Grandma Gaiska complained of severe headaches and was taken to the doctor, who said it was just menopause and told her after a while she would feel better. However, soon she began to display signs of mental illness. Her personality abruptly changed and she became violent. One morning, she could not get out of bed or even swallow a sip of water. The family took her to the hospital, where she was admitted for observation. Later, they did exploratory surgery on her brain and found a tumor the size of an orange. The surgeons attempted, unsuccessfully, to remove the tumor, and she died soon after surgery. What a shock to the family. She died on Christmas Day, 1954. My dad was deeply grieved. Not knowing he was suffering from PTSD due to the traumas he had experienced during the war, the anger he felt for so long inside simmered even hotter beneath the surface. He decided that the doctors were to blame for his mother's death, and from that day forward, his opinion of the medical profession was met with suspicion and much distrust. Since Grandpa Louis was now alone, he would visit us often. He built a dollhouse in the yard for my sisters and me. It was big enough for a 5-year-old to stand up in and had a little loft where we could put our dolls to sleep. Playing house inside this special structure was one of my favorite games. When I was 3 or 4 years old, he asked me if I would like to take a puff of his cigarette, of all things. Apparently, I wanted to try it, so he let me. I placed the correct end between my lips, but when I went to breathe in the smoke, I sucked the whole cigarette into my mouth. It stopped when it hit my tonsils. I began to choke and cough like crazy, vomiting up my latest meal. Grandpa never told my mother about his little joke, and after that, I never wanted to touch a cigarette again. Life on a farm is always adventuresome for a big family with lots of land to explore, daily chores, and animals to care for. One day, when my dad was gathering hay bales for winter storage in the barn, he decided it was time to take a break and rest. My brothers and sisters and I joined him. We probably were given a snack and drink to carry out to him from my mother. We used the hay bales as chairs and were enjoying some family fun under the big blue Canadian sky, when suddenly my little sister Taylor began to scream and wiggle wildly. Dad ran over to his daughter and observed the situation. He couldn't tell exactly what was wrong, but it looked like some kind of creature may have slipped into her clothing. He removed her shirt. She continued to flail. He was about to remove her pants when suddenly a little field mouse exited Taylor's pant leg. Since we had such a large family, my father would often take his older children to the fields with him while he worked, so that my mother would only have the babies to attend to. One day he took my older sister Hilda and older brother Landon and me along with him. Our approximate ages were 8, 6, and 4. We played at the edge of the field while Dad worked. He loved his kids and enjoyed doing special things with them. So on this particular day, he invited us to ride on the hay wagon, which he had hitched behind the John Deere. What kid doesn't like a ride on a moving hay wagon? I enjoyed the sense of being carried along by the big wheels and watching Dad drive the tractor. The bumps made me giggle. I'm sure we imagined we were passengers on a train because Dad had a second wagon hitched to the first. This wagon was loaded over half full of hay bales. The first wagon only had a few bales loaded on it, and Dad invited the three of us to sit on these bales on the first wagon while he drove through the field. I was sitting on a bale closer to the back. Suddenly, the hay wagon hit a deep pothole in the ground, causing me to tumble off onto the ground and under the second wagon with all the hay. The left front wheel rolled toward my shocked body. I remember seeing it. My father was completely oblivious to my plight, though. Hilda began screaming at the top of her lungs for him to stop, and he did, but not in time. The first wheel had already run over my midsection. When Dad saw what had just transpired, I'm sure he felt panic. The wagon wheel should have crushed my little body. He ran over and scooped me up in his arms and held me. I remember him asking me if I could stand. I tried and felt something shift inside my pelvis and low back. Quickly, he carried me home and told Mom what happened. I don't recall if we went to a doctor or not, but I do remember crying as my mother removed the bandages each morning and cleaned the huge abrasions on my torso and hips so they would not get infected. Eventually, my parents had enough money to buy a farm of their own, along with a herd of Jersey cows. They purchased a place in Walton, Ontario. The house and land were a step backwards, but at least they could call it their own place. The land yielded poor crops, and the house did not have an indoor toilet. Instead, a small shed-like structure was attached to the entry room off the kitchen, where we hung our coats and piled our shoes and boots. Inside this little shed was a semi-outhouse. It had a long bench-like seat made of wood with 2 oval holes cut out and pails underneath them. My parents had to empty the pails of excrement, but we had the distinct advantage of not having to walk from the house to a freestanding outhouse to do our daily business. And on top of that, 2 people could use this crude facility at the same time. Efficiency. The farmhouse had a hand pump over the kitchen sink that my mother would crank up and down for water, cold only. She heated the pails of water on the stove for our weekly bath, whether we wanted one or not. A bathtub was located in one of the downstairs bedrooms for privacy. Mom and Dad had their cows butchered for meat instead of buying it at the grocery. Not one edible part of the animal was wasted. A large rectangular iron stove fueled by wood was located in the kitchen. We used it for cooking and heating the house. Mom cooked a delicious, savory broth from cow bones. This made a perfect base for soups. Another dish she enjoyed cooking for us was cow tongue in a salty broth spiced with various herbs. It really did make a delightful sandwich meat, but you had to peel away the outer layer of coarse skin lined with taste buds from the meaty part of the tongue. According to my parents, the richer people who lived in the community in and around Walton were very prideful and looked upon poorer people with disdain. I guess we were classified as the poor, but as a child, I didn't know anything about all the conflict people had over money and class. But I experienced their bullying when I started grade school, grade 1. I still remember how I felt the day the girl who sat in front of me in class turned around and looked at a picture I had just colored. She criticized my work loudly. "You don't know how to color. That's really ugly. You don't know how to color in one direction to make it look pretty like my picture. And your clothes aren't nice. They're not as nice as mine. You look ugly too." My innocent heart began to pound as I felt the sting of her insults. Then I looked at my picture, comparing it with hers. I had to agree. Her picture was colored better than mine. I hadn't learned to color in one direction yet, but after that experience, I soon learned to color really well. It became one of my favorite childhood activities, and a part of my personality came forward. If someone ever challenged me or criticized me, I would try to turn the issue around by becoming really good at whatever it was they criticized. But I didn't know what to do about my clothes. I concluded that this girl was definitely not going to be one of my friends. It was good and bad growing up in a large family. I liked having playmates and companions available at all times, but rarely did I get much privacy. I didn't feel lonely, that's for sure. I shared a bedroom with my two sisters. All three of us had to fit our clothes into a small closet, but that didn't bother me. I had enough room for my clothes. And another thing, it was great to have my little sister next to me in bed when I got scared at night. Sometimes my imagination would run away wild about snakes when I got scared at night, imagining coming them up from under the bed. I was afraid of the dark too. And if I had a bad dream that woke me up in the middle of the night, I could snuggle close to my sister and hear the comforting sound of her breathing. This kept me grounded in reality so I could go back to sleep. I didn't dare wake up my parents for help. They taught me when I was much younger not to disturb them at night. It was a punishable offense unless you had a really good reason. And being in a big family made it easy for me to disappear into the crowd. If I wanted to hide something, usually I could, because Mom and Dad couldn't keep an eye on everyone and everything all the time. But it was a distinct disadvantage to be in a large family when I really wanted my parents' attention and couldn't have it. They were often too busy or occupied with my siblings and their work. How did I compensate? I fought for attention by being extra good and happy. I learned to be independent, to figure things out on my own, and to rely on help from my older siblings. I followed them instinctively. Usually that worked out all right, except when Hilda got bossy. Looking back on it now, though, I don't blame her for it. Mom looked to her for help to raise her older children, and Hilda took to it naturally because of her strong leadership and nurturing personality. I also had a bossy side, being one of the older girls, one of the older children. With my sister's example and not much of an idea about how to supervise the younger children, I'm sure I could be commanding too. One day, a neighbor got angry because our little family dog, Brownie, was running in his field. Instead of calling us to come get our displaced dog, he got out his shotgun and killed our family pet. Then he called my dad to come pick up the animal. That's how the bullies in this town dealt with things. My whole family was devastated. I cried myself to sleep that night. Around that time, Dad became seriously interested in the Radio Church of God, later named the Worldwide Church of God, headed up by Herbert W. Armstrong. While milking the cows in the evening, he would listen to the radio. Armstrong's program would come on at that time. It was called The World Tomorrow. His teachings about the end of the world and how to be saved from the Great Tribulation naturally caught Dad's attention after his experiences in World War II. He sent off for the church's literature. He and Mom studied it with great enthusiasm and soon asked for a minister to come and visit. I had just turned 5 years old. Not long after that, they began to attend the church's services and they were baptized. Church was held in Toronto, 2 hours away. 2 hours away from us. Members were expected to attend regularly. Jersey cows give rich milk, but they are very temperamental to care for. Several of my dad's herd began to show signs of ill health. The farm just couldn't produce enough high-quality feed for their meals, and my dad didn't have as much time as he wanted to care for them properly. It was hard to juggle his farm chores and new religious duties. When the cows needed milking on Saturdays, he had to be at church. So my parents decided it was time to get out of farming and to look for a different source of income, one that would not interfere with the requirements of their new religious beliefs as much. I wasn't old enough to reason out the changes that were happening. I just went along obediently, mirroring my parents' enthusiasm and assimilating things as I was taught. I didn't even notice that we lost the close connection we had with my grandparents and extended relatives. Our new way of life occupied most of my parents' free time, and the church discouraged influence from people on the outside. Dad found work on a mushroom farm in Acton, Ontario, where we moved after the farm sold. He did not enjoy this job at all. Nicotine was used as a pesticide there, and it made him feel nauseous and dizzy every time he had to spray it. So he quit when he found a job at a small gold refinery, operating the ovens that melted the precious metal. Things were so tough financially that Mom had to carefully plan the meals so everyone had enough to eat. I was around 5 years old then. One day, we were all sitting around the kitchen table to begin our supper. Mom had made soup. It was very hot. I thought it would cool quicker if I sprinkled some salt in it. Dad told me I'd put in enough salt and to go ahead and eat. It was still too hot, so I reached for the salt shaker again, not comprehending that I was being disobedient. Suddenly, he grabbed me off the chair and took me into the other room for a hard spanking with his belt. This experience was a defining moment for me. I felt all alone. Mom did not defend me. My brothers and sisters were with her at the table eating, not that they could have helped. My dad, my father, who was supposed to love and bless me, now took out his rage on me. I felt completely defenseless, overwhelmed, and stripped down. The belt made my skin sting and welt up. My parents often spanked me and my siblings on our bare behinds. This was one of those times. After the spanking, Dad yelled at me in disgust to get back to the table and eat. As I sat there whimpering, he flicked me hard with his pointer finger several times, demanding that I stop crying. I buried my face as far into the food as possible, trying to hide. And then there wasn't more soup to replace my oversalted bowl. Apparently, the pressure Dad was under because of the tight budget, topped off with my infraction, made him snap. I didn't know he had PTSD until I was much older, but as I look back on it now, I see how it affected the way he disciplined me. It was at our house in Acton that I had my first experience with a snake. As it happened, the property was close to a swamp and snakes could find their way into our basement. One day, my brothers Landon and Ray found a 3-foot non-venomous snake in the basement. That's a non-venomous snake in the basement, crawling on the laundry basket on top of the clothes. Mom still used a wringer washer and hung the clothes to dry. They killed the reptile and hung it on Mom's washing machine stick by its head. She used this wooden stick. It looked like a round, thick dowel, about 2.5 feet long, for stirring the clothes in the sink. It was also used for spanking when we were disobedient. Mischievously, my brothers called for me. "We have something to show you, Grace. Come to the basement." When I arrived, suddenly they whirled around and flung the snake into my face. I screamed and ran away in a flurry of tears and anger. I can still feel the cold reptile hit my nose. Then I reported what they did to my mom. I think she went after them with the washing machine stick. At least I hope so. I still can feel the cold flesh of that snake's belly on my nose. Most of the time, I was an obedient child, but occasionally I would get into trouble. One day, I was enjoying swinging on a swing my father had hung for us from a tree next to the house. As I sat on the wooden board and pumped myself high into the bright blue sky, I thought how fun it would be to swing upside down. So I leaned my upper torso backwards, and enjoyed feeling the blood rush to my head. Mom saw me and stopped my fun. With an expression of great concern in her face, she admonished me, "Grace, that's dangerous. Don't do it again. If you lean back too far, you could hit your head and break your neck." The next day, I decided not to listen and leaned back again as I swung. Sure enough, my head scraped the packed down dirt below the swing. Thankfully, I did not break my neck, but I did scrape about half an inch of hairline from my forehead. When I came into the house, my mother immediately saw my condition and asked what happened. I answered, "Oh, nothing." I think I honestly thought that if I didn't tell her, she wouldn't notice my bloody receded hairline. Wisely, Mom decided I'd learned my lesson and didn't punish me for disobeying her instructions. Our house in Acton had one full bath upstairs, complete with toilet, sink, and tub. My imagination was really working one day when I was taking a bath. I eyed the shower curtain rod as I soaked my 7-year-old body in the warm soapy water. What if I could swing on that rod? I thought it would be fun, and that's just what I did. I grabbed the rod with both hands and swung with all my might like a trapeze artist. But things did not go as I had planned. As soon as my full body weight registered on the bar, the screws pulled loose out of the wall on both ends of the rod. The rod, shower curtain, and my body all came crashing down into the tub, which was still draining. I got some pretty significant bruises, but thankfully no major injuries. Needless to say, Dad and Mom weren't too happy with my poor judgment and the fact that a major repair would now need to be made. When they heard the loud thud upstairs, they both came running. I tried to hide my naked body behind the shower curtain, to no avail, as I quivered in pain and fear. Dad was very frustrated with me. Whenever he got super mad, normal punishment for big and sometimes little infractions was this: you pull down your pants, bend over to expose your bare bottom, and then he smacked you with his belt. That's what happened, except for the fact that I was already naked. Then I was sent to my room. I didn't really understand what had happened, but my double punishment left a lasting impression on my heart. Not long after joining the Worldwide Church of God, I'm going to abbreviate it to the WCG, my dad began to participate in their Spokesman's Club, a club where men learned the church's teachings and leadership skills, including public speaking. They had a gala dance for the men and their wives one evening during the week, and my parents decided to go. It would be our first time having a babysitter. Mom worked really hard to prepare for the evening and even baked cupcakes for the hors d'oeuvres table. I think she made enough for us kids to each have one too. White sponge cake with creamy lemon icing. Mom dressed in a beautiful chiffon gown she found in the used clothing supply at church, and Dad came home from work with a corsage for her to wear. Mom looked so beautiful. They were both very excited about their special evening. I was too. I had made plans of my own. There was a small convenience store and gas station across the street from our house. This is where we waited for the bus to pick us up for school in the morning and drop us off later in the day. While my parents were gone to the gala, I implemented my fabulous plan. I took all the money from my piggy bank, a mason jar, and went to spend every bit of it on candy at the convenience store. Upon arrival, I spilled out the coins on the counter for the store owner, who kindly counted the money and then helped me pick out my sweet treats. I left with a small brown paper bag nearly full of candy and snuck it to my bedroom, shutting the door. The first piece of candy tasted great. So did the second. But when I began to eat the third one, feelings of guilt and regret swept over me. I realized I'd rather have my money back than all this sweet stuff. I was so full of remorse. I actually remember, this is what I did. I got down on my knees beside the bed and asked God to forgive me. I told him I hoped the store owner would refund my money if I gave the candy back. Sheepishly, I returned to the convenience store. Upon arrival, the owner smiled into my eyes. I thought you would be back. I was pretty sure you didn't really want to spend all your money on candy, right? I nodded my head in agreement. Then he refunded my money and returned each piece of candy back to its respective jar. No more questions asked.